Okay. Good evening. This is the March 17th meeting of the Finance Committee. On tonight's agenda, we have, we're going to look at the budgets for the, for Bay Path, for the Auburn School Department, and for the Norfolk Agricultural Department. And then vote on transfer requests, although we don't have any, so we don't need to, and we don't have any minutes. So I have Bay Path first on my list here. So I want to welcome Dean Iacobucci, the business manager of the school, and Kyle Brenner. And why don't you gentlemen tell us, we have your budget presentation, maybe you could give us some highlights.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I'm Kyle Brenner. I'm the Superintendent Director of Bay Path Regional.
Oh, thank you.
And this budget was developed based on the assumption that the school will resume 100% in-person learning and that many of the health and safety protocols that we put in place will remain in place to mitigate the viral transmission. Additionally, the budget will maintain the core values of providing our students with high quality academic and technical education. The proposal continues our efforts to address not only our students' academic and technical needs, but also their social and emotional well-being. We are committed to our mission as well as maintaining our fiscal responsibilities to our member communities, even during these difficult financial times. Some of the highlights are we're adding a new technical program, veterinary assisting, that's being built out this year, and we're looking to add a full-time equivalent teacher for that. We're expanding our history department and adding a full-time equivalent history teacher to meet the different sections and class sizes for history. And we'll be updating some of the equipment in our technical trades and adding new equipment for our vocational technical program for veterinary assisting on that. At this point, I can turn it over to Ms. Iacobucci to do the slide presentation.
It's muted.
Thank you, Kyle.
And
Good evening, everybody.
A little.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
I'm going to try to move through this presentation kind of quickly for a couple of reasons. I know you've got a busy agenda. A lot of it is in the very same format that you've seen year after year. But there is some new information at the end that I think is worthwhile going over regarding the ESSA grants and the ability of the town to have a reduction in their minimum local contribution. And if that's things you're aware of, certainly slow me down or stop me. I don't want to waste time. But starting with slide number 2, as Kyle had said, our budget's based on the governor's numbers. Right now, our Chapter 70 funding is a $327,020 increase over the current year. Our proposed regional school transportation funding is a decrease of $309,051. And as you know, as the state progresses through their budget process, any changes would have to reflect in our budget. On page 3, you see what this means. Our required net spending for next year is $21,398,161. That's an increase of $1,215,935, and that's broken into our increase in Chapter 70 of $327,020, and the increase in minimum contributions that our 10 towns are required to give us collectively. Again, those are numbers developed by the state, and that increase is $888,915. On page 4, or slide 4, our total assessment budget for assessments is $24,561,858. Our member towns' assessments are at minimum. The budget includes debt service of $1,564,103, and our member assessments total $11,745,288. On page 5, we are making sure that everybody is fully aware that even though our budget and our requirements from the town are at minimum, it's still an increase of $888,915 that the towns have to give us. We sometimes get criticized locally about why aren't we asking for more money. So we think it's important that people realize, even though we're at the minimum, it still has almost increased $900,000 for our towns. Our member town assessments have been, for transportation, have been reduced by $300,000, which reflects the use of our regional transportation, regional reimbursement fund that we established last year to deal with surplus revenue transportation. On page 6, I'll skip through some of this stuff. We do have a betterment fee that we pay to the town of Charlton for tying into the sewer that will go on for one more year. We have, as we have in the past many years, are requesting that the school committee appropriate $50,000 from deficiency to continue funding our OPEB liability. And we're also recommending to reserve $150,000 of E&D for unknown budgetary or COVID-related expenses. As you're all aware, come June 30th, we are not able to access our excess and deficiency unless we incorporate part of it for an appropriation into our budget. Our E&D typically doesn't get certified by the state until January or February, and we didn't want to go through 7 or 8 months of the school year without having access to our E&D if some very large expenses resulted from COVID-related expenses. So this just is almost a place marker. It provides an available funding source that has no impact on our members or their assessments, but just makes some of our E&D available to us sooner. On page 7, you can see how our budget comes together. You see our operational budget is made up of our Chapter 70 funding. We also have a school choice assessment of $197,697, and that comes right off of our Chapter 70 funding. Our town's minimum contributions collectively are $9,827,933. We're funding our OPEB liability or unfunded liability at $50,000, and then that $150,000, making our total operational budget $21,400,464. Our estimated transportation costs next year are $1,521,541. Our Chapter 70 is the $899,039. We've also reduced the amount needed to be raised by $300,000, leaving an assessment to our towns of $322,502. See the breakdown of our debt of $1,564,103, the capital assessment to the town of Charlton, making our total budget for assessments $24,516,858. And when we add the school choice back in, our total operating budget with school choice is $24,714,555. Kyle had gone through a lot of the budget highlights, so I'm going to skip through the ones that he's already mentioned. He did mention adding the veterinary science teacher. We also have funds to include a history teacher next year, address class sizes, and we have included funds to restore a vocational job site coordinator position, which was vacated this year due to a resignation, and because of the remote nature of our operation this year, it didn't make a lot of sense to fill that position, so we've reallocated those funds elsewhere. But we want to bring that position back. At any point in time, we have somewhere in the area of 150 kids out at job co-ops or job sites, and those sites need to be visited, the students need to be visited, the work that they're doing needs to be evaluated, and this position, our co-op program has grown so large that it just can't be handled within in-house staff. And we've included funds to provide wage increases for union and non-union positions. We've also included funds to implement the Student Opportunity Act, which is something that was supposed to be implemented this year, but the state delayed because of the pandemic. But we've been advised that we will need to implement that next year, and that caused an increase in our Chapter, so not caused, but provided an increase in some of our Chapter 70 funding, and we have to then now allocate those expenses to that. Excuse me. The last thing I want to mention is we're very happy with the fact that not only have our health insurance rates been stable, they're actually decreasing next year. We've had the same rates for the past 2 years, and next year we'll see a 2% decrease. And that really goes out to our staff. 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, we approached them with a proposal to have a plan design change where we increased co-pays, introduced the deductible with the promise that this would stabilize our rates. Because as you know, health insurance rates can, seeing a double-digit increase isn't uncommon. Our approach worked, and we're fortunate that we are seeing a decrease of rates by 2% next year. On slide number 11, you can see how our freshman seat allocation is broken out. We're anticipating bringing in 315 students. Auburn owns 46 of those seats based on your capital population. On page 12, you see our foundation enrollment for all of our 10 towns. Auburn is seeing almost a 9% increase in the foundation enrollment, and you'll see how the enrollment is actually the driving factor that is showing your increase in your minimum contribution level. But we've provided that information for all of our 10 towns. When you look at Auburn's foundation enrollment, including all of your school districts, and by that would be the Auburn Public Schools, Bay Path, and any agricultural students you may have. Now keep in mind this information is based on October 1st, 2020 information, which is then used to calculate your funding for fiscal year 22. The Auburn Public Schools have 2,421 kids, which is a 90 student decrease. And again, this is having an impact on why your assessment to us increases, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. And then you see the increase that we have from 90 students to 99. So even though overall you've lost 81 students, we are seeing an increase at our school of 9 students. On page 14, or slide 14, I've tried to really quickly show you some of the calculations and numbers that come into play for your assessment. And these are numbers that are determined by the Commonwealth. The first is your required local contribution for next year. And what this represents is the minimum amount that you're required to fund education at. It certainly isn't the maximum. It certainly isn't anything other than this is what the state says you have to provide for education. How do they calculate that number? It's really not a difficult calculation. They start with this year's required contribution, apply your municipal revenue growth factor to it, and that becomes your preliminary required local contribution for next year. If you are above or below a target share number, which the state calculates to determine whether or not you're appropriating enough money or too much money, they'll make adjustments and call it an excess local contribution. In your case, this calculation creates an amount above the target share. So you actually see a reduction of $145,125, making next year's required local contribution $16,498,819. Below that, and you'll see why these numbers are important in a second, the state calculates your foundation budget. The foundation budget for Auburn is $26,087,204. of which 93.93% is going to the Auburn Public Schools and 6.07% is coming to Bay Path. And you'll see in 1 second why those percentages are important. The required contribution is $16,498,819, and that's spread amongst us and the public schools in Auburn. And the percentages is what comes into play when determining how that gets broken out. Now, an interesting note is, regardless of how the money is allocated, you're required to fund $16.5 million. What this chart is trying to show you is we're getting a bigger piece of the pie because of the enrollment swing. So not only do we have 9 more students, but the fact that our enrollment increased and the Auburn Public Schools decreased is making part of this $16.4 million coming to us, which then shows as an increase in our assessment and your minimum contribution level. On page 16, this is really not much of a budgetary impact other than the numbers that are used to determine your capital assessment, but it's important information in terms of what's happening in the district. And this is a list of all school-age students, whether they are attending public school, private school, or being homeschooled. And you can see what's happening as a trend in our district. From last year to this year, we've lost close to 250 students, and 60% of our towns have lost students from last year to this year. If you look at this going back to school year 2014-2015, 80% of our towns have lost students, and the student enrollment, or not the student enrollment, but the school-age students in our entire district has decreased by $1,221. And I state that for one reason and one reason only. A long time ago, somebody had asked me to describe the Chapter 70 formula, and as you've looked into it, there's a lot of calculations and a lot of things that play into it. But the bottom line is kids equal dollars. The more kids you have, the more Chapter 70 funding you get. And you can imagine the impact that this has in our entire district when we have 1,200 fewer students. We're talking about millions of dollars in state aid. On page 17, I've given you, slide 17, I've given you a breakdown of all of our 10 towns assessments. If we look at Auburn, you see your minimum contribution to Bay Path at $1,001,339. Moving across to the middle of the page, your share of the transportation assessment is $26,606. Then continuing to the right, see the debt service of $230,236. And then finally, your capital improvement, which is your share of that sewer tie-in that we paid at Charlton, of $4,526, for a total assessment of $1,262,707. So how does that compare to this year on slide 18? You'll see that your minimum contribution has gone up 16.75%. And the two reasons for that are the larger amount of students coming to Bay Path and your loss of students in the Auburn schools, causing a shift of the funding to come to us. Your total assessment is an increase of $139,621, or 12.43%. Does anybody have any questions before we get into a discussion about ESSER II funds?
Gentlemen, do you have any questions? No, I have a couple. The first question was the school choice assessment. How does that work? Because I know that it seems to be working differently from how I'm used to it in the regular, in the Auburn schools.
Well, it's actually kind of the same.
Okay.
If we have a student And I'll use a hypothetical situation. If we have a student that goes to Tantascwa, say he lives in Spencer, and school choices into Tantascwa,
Oh,
and then continues his education at the high school in the vocational program. The school is not at that point allowed to take him in as a tuitioned or feed student because they allowed him into the district under the school choice program. So that student would be a charge to us. What really dictates the school choice assessment is who has the financial responsibility to educate the child. And in this particular case, it's BayPath. And since they're going to another vocational program under the school choice, they're our responsibility to fund the school choice. If this was a student who lived in Spencer and went to one of the agricultural schools, as you're aware, the town of Spencer would have to pick up the tuition and the transportation costs, not BayPath. But in the case that I just gave you, because this child started as a school choice student and then continued up, it's our assessment.
okay, that makes sense, I understand that. All right, and I just didn't imagine, I can't imagine, does that happen often, going from BayPath to another vocational school?
I would say, in this particular case, it's about 35 kids.
Oh, it is, okay.
So,
And actually, that's it, that's my only question right now, if you want to continue, please, thank you.
okay, again, I don't know how much you've read or have looked into the use of elementary and secondary school relief grant, or affectionately known as ESSER 2 funds. I typically don't like to read to people, but I'm going to because this really kind of succinctly describes what's going on. So the Governor's House 1, Chapter 70 proposal allows cities and towns who are experiencing increases in their minimum local contributions to fund all or part of that increase using federal stimulus funds. Those are the ESSER 2 funds. If a regional school district's member municipality decides to exercise the provision, the district must reduce that member's minimum local contribution by its ESSER 2 share of the calculation of that member's assessment. Regional school district members can only use a share up to 75% of the district's total ESSER 2 award. What that is saying is this is something that is the ball's in your court. Our district does not have, or our school committee does not have the legal authority to say, yes, you're going to apply ESSER funds, or no, you're not. That lies strictly with the town. Member towns should understand that if this provision is included in the final budget, that using ESSER 2 funds to offset minimum local contribution increases is a one-time municipal relief, meaning if this provision of the law stays through when the state does its final budget adoption and you see a decrease in your minimum local contribution, it's a one-year decrease. The starting point from where they will begin or to calculate your minimum local contribution will not be the fiscal year 22 less the ESSER application. It'll be what you should have paid as a minimum local contribution in 23 fully, in 22. And that will become the benchmark as to what they're going to use to calculate your funding requirement in 23. So on page 20, this chart again shows you the information for all 10 towns. But let's walk through Auburn's. And first of all, if you look under the column that has the bold Southern Worcester County Regional, our ESSER 2 allocation is $447,033. 75% of that is $335,275. And then collectively, our total required minimum local contributions from our 10 towns, as we just saw in the presentation, is $9,827,933. If we look at child's share, you can see that you have a change in your required minimum contribution of $143,681. Your share of that $9.8 million required local contribution is 10.2%. That 10.2% is then applied to that $335,275 that we can use as the share for ESSA 2 allocations, making your proportional share $34,160, meaning that increase that we talked about in local contribution can be reduced by that $34,160. Now, we fully expect that should this provision of the law make it through to final state budget, that all of our towns are going to opt to have their local contributions reduced. I can't understand or see why they wouldn't. So what does this do to you? And again, although we'll focus on Auburn, I've given you the information of all of our 10 towns, and I'm just on chart number 21. You can see that based on the governor's budget, your minimum contribution is $1,001,339. You get, and I'm moving to the middle of the page. You can see the ESSA 2 allocation of $34,060 coming off. So your increase in minimum local contribution would go from 16.75% down to 12.74%. And then you can see that information for all of our 10 towns. On slide number 22, again, it's the same information, but it shows how it impacts your total assessment. Your total assessment without the application of the ESSA 2 funds is a 12.43%. If you apply the fund, you'll see that your increase becomes 9.39%. And then finally, as I said earlier, the application of these funds solely lies with the town. But again, there's no way of knowing if this provision will be included in the final state budget. Because of this, the assessments adopted by the school committee do not include these reductions, or does not include the reductions of the town's minimum local contribution by its ESSA 2 share of the calculation. If the school committee were to apply this reduction now, and the provision is not included in the final state budget, the 8 towns that are seeing increases in their minimum local contributions would need to increase their funding probably at a fall town meeting, because the state's budget, I don't believe, is going to be adopted before most of our towns, or I think before all of our towns have their annual. As was done in December of 2020, the school committee typically returns excess funds that are received by the district after the adoption of the budget and lowers assessments. In the event that this provision is included in the final state budget, the school committee has already been advised that they will reduce the member towns' assessments by their share, and as I said, we fully expect that all of the towns will do that. So there's ESSA 2 in a brief nutshell. But I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you very much for going through that. That was a helpful presentation. Members, Kevin, do you have any questions?
It would be more for Ed relative to that and how we plan to, or would we expect to apply for that, those provisions that Dean just went over.
That wasn't me barking, but Dean, great presentation. Kyle, it's a pleasure to meet you for the first time.
Thank you.
Dean, with respect to Kevin's question, because I was going to present this question to you as well, as far as the ESSA 2 stimulus funds being part of the final state budget, which we don't know what the outcome is going to be, the local option acceptance of that, is that, do you know if that is done by a vote of the Board of Selectmen?
That I don't know. I've not seen any guidelines on how the implementation works. The only thing that I've seen from the state is a one-page description of everything, and I kind of took that one page and condensed it into the 3 bullets. So I don't know how what the mechanism is to kick it in. It would seem to me that when they reference the community, they're referencing the Board of Selectmen. I can't see how this could be an action at town meeting, especially if the state's budget gets passed in June, and then actually, I'm sure you'll probably agree, we'll probably be lucky if it's passed in June. So I would suspect that it would be a vote of the Board of Selectmen. And, from our perspective, if we get that information and no further clarification from the state, that is the way we would proceed.
Very good. Yeah, I just want to caution the Finance Committee members.
Yeah.
It is very appetite to take advantage of this option. Although when you look at a subsequent year's budget, you have to build that back in because it's only a one-year time relief, just like any other federal stimulus money. So we have to be cautious about how we approach this, knowing that the next fiscal year we may have to build that back in, plus more, if we maintain that current enrollment.
That's a very good point, Ed, and because I do believe that some of our towns are going to forget that. Get colleges in, and all of a sudden they're going to see a monster increase in their minimum local contribution and not recognize that there was a one-year reduction.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And how about, Michael, do you have any questions?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks, okay. And Ed?
No, I'm good as well. I thought the presentation and then a lot of the questions I would have had were around student population, and that was all laid out very clear, so I'm good.
Thank you.
Good thing. Thank you. I had a question about the transportation fund that you talked about setting up. What does that involve?
Sure. Excuse me. Last year, we had the school committee adopt to accept the provision of the law that allows the creation of this transportation reimbursement fund. And we did that last year for a couple of reasons. Now, as you know, historically, whenever we get additional transportation revenue, we come to a point at some time during that year where we reduce everybody's assessment by their share of the increase in Chapter 71 funding. Last year was kind of a very unusual year in that school stopped in the middle of March. And as such, so didn't our transportation expenses for the most part. We negotiated with our transportation vendor, as every school district did, and negotiated a reduction in the contract. Those reductions for the municipalities were all in the 50 to 80% range, not the reductions, but the amount that they negotiated down to were in the 50 to 80% range. We were able to get ours down to 20%, meaning that 80% of our expenses, which then translates into the revenue that was generated to pay for those expenses, became available. Instead of reducing everybody's assessment last year and returning those funds last year, we're allowed to take the surplus appropriations and transfer them into this transportation reimbursement fund. And by law, we only have 1 year to use them. If we don't use them, they would close out to our excess and deficiency, but the school committee has already made a solid commitment that any funds that go in there will be used. So this year, we're estimating that we will have about $300,000 in surplus appropriations again. And what we will do in June is transfer that $300,000 revenue into the reimbursement fund and make it available. This year, for the current fiscal year, in June, the school committee transferred $425,000 of appropriations last year into this fund, and all $425,000 have already been used to reduce the transportation assessments that we give to the towns. So this will be a mechanism that we can use year in year going forward. So for instance, if this year, and again, I'm making some numbers up, but if this year, if we got, $50,000 in additional transportation aid, when we break that out to our towns, some of our towns are seeing a refund of $800. Instead of refunding the money this year, we can transfer it into this reimbursement fund and use it to fund assessments for next year. So that's kind of how that fund works. It provides us a mechanism to take any surplus appropriations, not appropriation, but surplus revenue we receive and put it into a fund to make it available to our 10 towns as a reduction in their transportation assessment.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you for that update.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
one of the questions I have, and Dean, give me a 30-second update on OPEB. What's your unfunded liability? Do you have a funding policy? If so, how much is in the trust? And do you know what your ratio of funded to unfunded is?
I don't have that number, but our unfunded liability is about $16.5 million, and our trust fund currently has a balance of about $500,000 in it. We are not using any of that to offset retiree health insurance at this point. We're just trying to build it up. And we've been doing the $50,000 a year now for 5 or 6 years.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, hearing no other questions, we're looking at the Bay Path request and the town manager recommendation are the same. $1,262,707, and that represents an 8.61% increase to the fiscal 2021 appropriation. Do I hear a motion to recommend this amount?
Motion to recommend.
Second.
Thank you. So let me do the roll call. All in favor? Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So that budget is recommended. Thank you very much, Mr. Brennan, Mr. Iacobucci, for coming today and presenting the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Bye.
Take care, Ed. All right, take care, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Well, the next budget we're looking at is the Auburn Public School budget. And Dr. Casey Hanfield is here, our school superintendent, and the business manager, Cecilia Worsbicki. Okay, so Dr. Hanfield, did you have a presentation that you were going to show us, or?
I did. Good evening, everyone. Let me first say thank you for having us here tonight. I believe this is my first opportunity to be before you. Meetings typically run at the same time, but nevertheless, I'm thrilled to be here tonight. I do have a quick presentation to share with you, so let me get that up on the screen. I'd like to thank Mr. Brenner and Mr. Iacobucci as well for their presentation. It kind of did discuss a lot of the, funding as it relates to Chapter 70 and things that are going on at the federal and state levels. Obviously, you've seen my predecessor, Dr. Brunel, who passes along her hellos to all of you for several years prior, and so a lot of this probably will sound familiar to you. But nevertheless, anytime that we develop budgets, at least for the last 10 years or so that I've been here, we've always really looked at our mission, which is strengthening connections through rigor, relevance, and relationships, and how that aligns with our vision, which is to create opportunities and challenges for our students in a changing world. And we look at our core values: student-centered decision-making, all of our environments being safe and respectful, equitable opportunities for all students, high expectations for all, responding to needs based on data, and being dedicated always to continuous improvement. The school committee has a strategic plan that I think you're familiar with. Some of you were a part of this process back in 2017. Within the strategic plan, there are 5 targeted areas that guide our work in the areas of teaching and learning, technology, health, wellness, and safety, transitions, and community partnerships. This budget that's before you this evening is predicated also on providing our children with the best educational opportunities possible, pandemic or not. And needless to say, this has been a very challenging year for us. And this budget is also predicated on maintaining the high standards and achievement of our school districts while continuing to be a highly sought after community, in part because of our school system. Within the teaching and learning categories, the budget before you reflects class sizes that are below the 25 students per class at the elementary level, while maintaining appropriate class sizes at both the middle and high school levels. With respect to technology, funded both through CIP, operating budget, school choice, and other grant funds, this budget continues our one-to-one iPad initiative in grades 6 through 12, but it also expands it kindergarten to grade 12, in that every student will have a one-to-one iPad. With the pandemic, not everything has been terrible. Some of the things that have been positive have been opportunities to expand our instructional repertoire to kids, and that includes carrying forward a one-to-one iPad initiative for all of our students in the district. We're also continuing to develop asynchronous and synchronous learning opportunities. If this pandemic has taught us nothing, it's definitely taught us to be prepared for something like this in the future. And it's also taught us to ensure that we have appropriate infrastructure in all of our buildings. Professional development is a key cornerstone of our budget. Our faculty and staff are committed to being lifelong learners. In fact, their disciplines demand it. And so we have ample funds included to support dynamic professional development opportunities for our faculty and staff, and to also build in-house capacity to further their knowledge and skills, and not necessarily have to always use financial means to secure those opportunities. Some of the things that we'll be looking at next year will be social justice, social emotional learning, and again, leveraging technology with our students in and out of the classrooms. With respect to student achievement, we are dedicated to continuous improvement, as I said at the outset, in educational excellence to ensure our kids are prepared to embrace and conquer all of the opportunities that they'll face as adults. Part of that includes continuing to promote our preschool for our town's youngest children that reduces or removes financial barriers so they can access education as needed. It also includes academic, vocational, technical, and soft skill preparation for our kids PK to 16 for post-high school success. It includes continuing beyond the school day and beyond the school year opportunities for all of our students to excel, whether it be in enrichment situations, accelerated learning opportunities, or advanced programs. And we also have money in this budget to meet the needs of our children who need us long after grade 12, such as our Encore program for students 18 to 22, that's in its inaugural year this year at the central office. Of course, health, wellness, and safety goes hand in hand with trying to educate our children. It's paramount, and in this budget, we have funds to support the emotional needs of our teachers and students. We make a strong commitment to a stable nursing corps within the Auburn Public Schools. We provide applied behavioral analyst support and instructional assistant support for our students with the most unique challenges so that they can achieve at their highest levels. We have funds to keep our buildings safe and proactively respond to any potential threats. We provide students with safe co-curricular activities in this budget to promote physical and social health and wellness. And this year in particular, it's really been imperative that we make sure that our families are being fed. Janice King in our food service program deserves a huge tip of the cap. Through USDA federal funding, she's been able to start a Meals to Go program, and within 2 weeks of schools having to close last March, we were feeding families nutritious meals that they may not otherwise be able to get. And we've served over 8,000 of these Meals to Go to our families through the summer, and very proud of that. We've also helped them with, during the pandemic, in getting established on their EBT program through the federal government, which provides targeted assistance for food for our families as well. And just as a kind of a quick reference point, you'll see here this chart, but over on the right-hand side, I'm not going to go through all of it, but down at the very bottom, you can see that almost 24% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Obviously, that's calculated based on socioeconomics of families, and so you can see that 24% is a substantial number of students who need that assistance. So we're very proud that we're able to help our families get the nutritional assistance they need. With respect to transitions, we feel it's imperative that our kids are adapting to new surroundings all the time, and we want them to feel safe and comfortable. This year, and these are things that will continue into the fall, introducing new faces and places, PK to 12, whether it's through Zoom or Meeting to Go or whatever the platform is. We continue to have various socially distanced transition activities at the end of our trimesters. We're inviting our parents and caregivers in to help ease transitions as well, because they're just as nervous as the kids. Our administrators are taking extra time to give personal transitions for families that request it. We're doing transitions for back to the end of the school year. As people may know, Auburn is returning full return April 5. So we're in the process of planning those transitions right now. And then, of course, in the fall, it'll be a whole nother transition with students coming back, especially those who've been remote for most of the school year. And of course, we always get new families into town, and so it's important to welcome them into the Auburn community as well. And then our community partnerships, we couldn't do what we do without our families, without our residents. Some of the organizations that we've worked with this year that have been so instrumental in helping us work through the pandemic include Auburn Youth and Family, Auburn Chamber of Commerce, the Town of Auburn, all of our boards, our police, our fire, Department of Health and Inspectional Services has been terrific. Folks that were on the Return to School Committee, I think actually Kevin was on that, Kevin Kennedy. Again, the Meals to Go program that I mentioned, our Staples has been absolutely fantastic with donating school supplies for our kids. And there are other community partnerships here, Auburn Life Care and Senior Center and so on and so forth that we really look forward to embracing as we kind of move through the pandemic and get vaccinated and can be in person again. So the assumptions and projections for the FY22 budget, again, as you heard in the previous presentation by Mr. Iacobucci, we're operating on the House 1 numbers as well. For Auburn, our Chapter 70s increased slightly over FY21. It's been about a $78,000 increase projected. And again, it's down compared to what we were expecting, but again, Chapter 70 is tied to enrollment, and as Mr. Iacobucci correctly stated, we're down about 90 kids this year. So the Chapter 70 is slightly elevated over last year, and then we, of course, have the town's projection of a 2.75 increase for all departments. We're not looking at adding any new staff. It's really imperative that we keep our current staff. However, emerging needs of our students can always change, this statement. All of our supply lines and buildings are level funded. The October 1 counts were used in terms of students at each grade level to ensure that our data was consistent and accurate for funding purposes. We've used the level funded grant monies from our 240 grant, Title I grant, and our Title IIA grant as offsets as well to reduce impact of the operating budget. We projected the Medicaid reimbursement to be $150,000 as approved at the annual town meeting, while also using anticipated carryover funds from previous years if they're available. We're anticipating a special education circuit breaker this year of just over $300,000, and we continue our participation in school choice with current seats at 100, but depending on enrollment patterns, I do have the ability from the school committee to up that in grades 6 through 12 if at all necessary and or possible. Our instructional assistants and our applied behavioral analysis instructional assistants have been noted in their current assignments, although movement, again, can occur, and it's based on student need. Whether we need more or less of those will depend, again, on student need. As was the case in FY21, we budgeted for 11 regular education school buses, making the assumption that the same number of students will ride the buses planned for this year. again, we have an assumption that the bus fee will continue, and it's currently in place at about $100. So we have $100,000 there as an offset. We have offsets in revolving accounts for building rentals, for satellite, Galaxy, building rental accounts, as well as preschool and athletic revolving accounts. We've got oil procured for FY22 at $1.69 per gallon, which will provide roughly a $13,000 savings compared to the current fiscal year. And if you recall, we had solar panels on the roofs of AMS and AHS. Those were installed in winter and early spring of 20. However, we budgeted conservatively for 22 as we don't have a full year of data yet to accurately project the annual savings the district could reasonably expect to incur as participating in that project. So all total, we are looking at a projected offset to the operating budget of $2,555,967 in this budget. And so the total request right now for FY22 is $27,988,540.45. This is a 0.99% or $312,485 increase over the June town meeting appropriated amount of $27,676,055. And this represents a 2.89% increase or $785,382.45 increase over the approved October town meeting amount of $27,214,157. As Mr. Iacobucci mentioned, there is ESSER 2 funds out there. They are, at least as far as Auburn goes, these ESSER funds are able to be utilized in fiscal year 22 and 23. We'll make application for those funds after July 1, and the primary purpose for those funds will be to support students' social emotional needs. It will be to stand up programming to help students who have been, who haven't made grade level progress during this time period of the pandemic. It'll also be money that is kind of a safety net if there should be something that goes, sideways, so to speak, with the pandemic and with our return to school. But that's kind of the quick nutshell. And, again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for your support as you've been given to us for so many years now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanfield. That was a very, very good presentation. Had a lot of information in it. I have some questions, but let me go to the members first. Kevin, do you have any questions regarding this budget?
Yeah, Dr. Hanfield, thank you for the presentation. Just quick questions regarding transportation. That's always a big outside contracted percentage of the budget. Sounded like there was some creativity going on at Bay Path relative to putting funds aside that were extra from previous years. Any thoughts to doing anything creatively with contracts? How long do our contracts go out for? And, would there ever be any appetite for bringing some of the transportation services in-house? I know Ed and Julie have done some creative things, bringing in, the DPW, for instance, with a lot of the in-house carpentry and electrical and repairs that have saved a lot of going outside for contractors. Just transportation is really the basis of my question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Kevin. Thank you for asking it. It's one of these things where we've, it's such a multi-pronged issue, right? Typically transportation contracts go out for 3 years. I believe we may be in year 2 of a current 3-year contract with AA Transportation. So when you go out to bid, for these, it never fails that there's always one bidder. And if you ask any school district throughout the state, how many bids do you get on your bus contract? They're all going to say just one. Telegram and Gazette actually did a big article on this maybe a year or two ago about the cost of transportation to school districts and the fact that there is this, lack of bidding going on, if you will, within districts. So, when you get into that type of a scenario, you're a little bit hamstrung, right? If you only have one bidder, that's kind of, where you are. In terms of particularly though, to the crux of your question, for us to, in some districts do this, I mean, we would have to examine the costs of maintaining our own fleet, our own drivers, and all of the costs that are associated with that. And we would have to, do a kind of just a financial analysis to see if there would be any substantial savings there. I'm not sure that there would be, but that doesn't mean that we won't go through the exercise. I think as we're moving forward with our budgets, I think, COVID has wreaked havoc, financially, on a lot of places. And, we're all going to be looking to the best of our ability to see where we can, be more efficient, even more so than we usually are. And so transportation is right up there. I mean, I want to say it's about $1 million, probably a little over, and that's just talking regular ed transportation. Then you start talking about special education transportation, and that's a whole nother, area of money. So that's a lot. So yeah, I think it's definitely a place that we can look and examine and see what we can come up with, if anything. But yeah, that's about where we are with transportation.
Thank you.
Sure.
All set, Mr. Kennedy? All right. Michael, do you have any questions?
No, great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And Ed, do you have any questions?
Yeah, it's got a couple of questions. When and I didn't go through the budget in detail, but when I look at the teacher salaries, 2021, 2022, when it says to be negotiated, is there a separate line item that recognizes anticipated increase, or is the budget based on no increase and then there'd be an adjustment later?
Yes, sir. So in the budget document, there's a number. It's captured in salary, what we call salary reserve.
Okay.
And so I believe there's a number of about $450,000 or so in salary reserve, and we put monies there in anticipation for contractual negotiations. So this number that's before you this evening encompasses all of that. So it's not a situation where, this is the number and then, whoops, we go to the table with any of our groups and say, oh, geez, we go back to Ed and say, hey, Ed, we need X percent. We've tried to look at historical trends and done some trend analysis on what our contracts typically are. And we've kind of made some assumptions in that realm too, but that's captured in that area of the budget.
Okay. How about where it was good to see? Well, I don't want to say it's good to read it, but you had mentioned in your presentation there were no new positions, and then the student count was down about 90. Kind of two questions off that. Is this the first year in a while that we haven't seen any mandates from, I guess, the federal government? I remember the last few years it'd always be a new position based on federal mandates.
Sure.
And then part two would just be, on those 90 students, I'm almost thinking once the pandemic's over, hopefully by the fall, if we see a rise in number of students, hopefully that will mean more Chapter 70 funding. But do we know offhand a lot of the decrease is due to kids going to private or homeschooled or relocated out of town?
Yeah, so thank you. That's a great question too. So as Mr. Iacobucci had stated, we've seen a decrease of about 90 to 100 students. I will tell you that that decrease is all over the map. We're seeing a large portion of students that normally would participate in our pre-K program, our Little Rockets preschool. About half of our enrollment is missing from there this year. Parents elected to keep their kids home. There were some families in the elementary grades in particular who, in some neighborhoods, 4 or 5 families elected to keep their kids out of school this year, and they hired their own private teacher. And then there were some instances where, yes, some decided to just outright homeschool, and then others chose to send their children to private school. We do, I'm expecting, and I mean, this is, I guess, a little bit of an educated bet, but my guess is that we will see a good majority of those kids return next year. So I anticipate that we will see a Chapter 70 increase 23. We're going to be watching that, but we're kind of thinking that's going to be the case. And then to your other point about, no, you're correct. I mean, the federal mandates are still there, but they've been too busy doing other things, I think, to pass us anything else right now. So we haven't had to to add additional staffing, to handle any new mandates. What we really tried to do is we really tried to, prepare a budget that is going to keep the adults that we have in front of our kids. One of the things that I think, is just really understated in a lot of places is we have no idea what the social and emotional impact is of this pandemic on our kids. We've been out of school. I mean, we're fortunate that, we've been able to work through, some things and get our kids back into school, but, kids haven't really known school as school for, over a year. And we don't know the full extent of what that's going to be, on kids socially and emotionally. We don't know the full extent of what that's going to be for them academically. But what we do know is that, having an adult in front of them who is an educator is going to be the fastest way to get kids back to where they need to be. And so we really tried to build a budget that was mindful of keeping our staff together, but also being mindful of the fact that, we are a piece of a pie in the town of Auburn. And as much as it's our first responsibility to advocate for the needs of our kids, we also understand that, all of the budgets, in town, we all work off of each other. And so we really tried to bring together a budget forward to everyone like we do every year, but especially this year, that's mindful of that and shows our commitment, even in these hard times, to be financially, responsible, to the taxpayer.
Maybe just one other question, then I'll be quiet. But I usually ask this question every year, and I always kind of wonder, based on what I've been reading in the press countrywide, have you seen any trends in town with a higher number of the baby boomer teachers retiring? Any trends in that?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So right now there's legislation before the House for an early retirement incentive. Right now it's at a standstill. I don't think the House has taken it up. Obviously, it's something that's being talked about at the state level as a way to mitigate a shortage of funding in many districts. With respect to Auburn, I literally just looked at this yesterday. The majority of our teaching faculty and related staff are in that 0 to 25-year range. We have about 5 to 10 folks that might possibly be early retirement or close to retirement. But there are school districts that are on the opposite side where they have a lot of folks that are kind of in that early retirement range should that law pass. So for us, the way that we're set up here as a smaller district, even if there were some folks that elected to go on early retirement, it would definitely be of assistance to the school district financially.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just have our members asked some of the questions I was going to ask. One is, but I do want to ask, I noticed the amount in the contractual obligations set aside for those contracts that aren't settled yet. I believe there are 3 bargaining units, teachers, nurses, and ABAs. Are all those potentially retroactive pays included in that line item?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
we anticipate, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, but we anticipate having those closed before the new fiscal year.
okay, great. No, yeah, and I understand. I mean, as long as the the money is in there and can just be shifted over. And,
Absolutely.
yeah, my other question was about the decrease in enrollment. Because again, that's unusual for Auburn. Auburn's been able to maintain its enrollment pretty steadily, especially with having kids come in with school choice. Now, is the state sets up the fiscal year 22 Chapter 70 money based on the population in the school in October 1st, 2020. So it seems, I mean, we can anticipate, I'm sure that Auburn's no different from other schools in that we would anticipate those kids are coming back. So is the state making any consideration for that?
So that's a great question. So this was a concern that was raised because, and Mr. Iacobucci again was hit the nail on the head with this too. We received a memorandum from Mr. William Bell. He's the kind of the state education guru who works out of DOR. And when we were looking at Chapter 70 for, just for each town and municipality for the coming fiscal year, pretty much every single school district was recognizing a nominal increase like we were, or even a little bit less. There were only selected towns that were seeing, and they were actually they were more like your urban centers in the state. The only ones who were seeing substantial increases. This question did come up, in a number of places at roundtables that I'm part of as a superintendent, also with our state superintendents association back in August, where we said, if we're losing, 3.5% of our enrollment, which has been consistent statewide, that's going to have a profound impact, on our Chapter 70. At the time, we were told that the state was considering holding us harmless for FY21 enrollment. As you can see in the House number, that's not what came to fruition. There is lobbying and legislation taking place right now, and it is being discussed. As a matter of fact, it was in House Ways and Means yesterday. They were debating this very issue. Whether or not to add additional funding, if not to make communities whole, at least make it not as painful. So that's something that we'll continue to keep our eyes on and see if something comes out of the House and Senate differently. But to play it, safe and conservative, we went with, all right, we know the floor, we know what the floor is, so we'll go with the floor. And then, working with Julie and Eddie on what the town, was anticipating for department increase, that's kind of how we went. So there's still a few things out there that I think are a little bit fluid. It's always a nice surprise to find money. So we'll wait and see if that happens. But, but again, and the other part of this too is the ESSER money. We will stand to see some ESSER money. It's tied to a Title I formula. But again, as Ed cautioned the committee, and Ed and I have talked about this a number of times, I call it soft money because, if you take that, that allocation and reduce, the town's assessment in fiscal year 24, and that money's not there, it's got to come from somewhere. So that's another piece too. So the upside, I guess, to the ESSER funds is that, if we don't see an increase from the state on the Chapter 70 side of things, and if the town revenues don't come in necessarily, and who knows where they're going to come in, right when they're finished, we do have a bit of a cushion, with the ESSER 2 monies for 22 and into 23, because it's a 2-year. We're allowed to break it out over 2 years. So. I think all things considered, we could be in a lot worse shape. I think we're sitting pretty well, and so I'm pleased with where we are now.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. And the school department's still maintaining that special ed stabilization account, correct? Yeah. And
as I was going through my presentation tonight, I was like, that's the one thing I forgot to mention. we have been faithfully, putting money back into sped stabilization. I think the balance in there right now is somewhere in the 475 range, 475,000. And this was Vicki and I were just meeting yesterday and talking about, as we start to wind things down for this fiscal year, seeing if we can't slide some additional money, into that stabilization as well. So we're in good shape there as well.
Okay, thank you. So, I appreciate. So, members, do you have any other questions about the regular budget for the schools? Okay.
And I just had one brief, just to follow up on your stabilization.
Yep.
Dr. Gifford, I had worked on that representing finance when we put together that fund, but I forget now, what was the maximum amount are we reaching? Was it, what did we, maybe we can get Cecilia, I know she's being quiet over there, maybe she can pull forward to the chime in.
Yeah.
But what was the amount that we capped that at?
Mm-hmm.
So, look, I don't think Cecilia, I don't know if she's having difficulties. I see her on the dashboard.
Yeah.
It's got a 2% cap of a formula, and I think at the time, the ceiling was about $560,000.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's creeped up a little bit, but that's about the ballpark where we're allowed to put it up.
Yeah, I was going to say 530 was what I thought. It was somewhere in that vicinity. But yeah, Ed, you're probably right. I think it's probably creeped up a little bit.
I know we envisioned at one point it would sort of the funding would slow down considerably. It would be there, and if it wasn't utilized, we would see savings in years to come. Obviously it's there in case special events occur or students come into the community. But it's good to hear that it's continued to be funded, and it's creeping up there towards.
Yeah, it's pretty healthy, and just and to that point, when we're talking, just kind of back to the discussion about the busing piece. One of the things, once I get my feet under me, a little bit, and we're not, kind of in COVID, response mode all the time, is there is potentially some significant savings to be realized in the special education realm, and that's examining our current out-of-district costs with students and our ability to stand up those same programs here in the district. I think that there's opportunity for us to do that. I've talked a little bit with Julie and Ed about some of my ideas around that. But it is possible for us to maybe make some inroads on those costs as well, because I think transportation costs are big, but as we know, and that's why we have the stabilization fund. Special education costs can go up quick, and and you're powerless. Through the law, unless you have something within district that you can say you have. And one example is our Encore program for our 18 to 22 students. Besides the fact that we truly believe that they're better off with us because we've known them for so long and we know what they need. If we were to send the 5 students that are in that program with us right now, that would cost us about $500,000 a year plus transportation. Right now, we have them in a wonderful program that we developed here in Auburn, and it's costing us, it's the equivalent of a full-time teacher and 2 aides. It's costing us $150,000 to stand up this program that these students are in their first year of for 4 years. So rather than pay $500,000 times 4, it's about 150 times 4. And so, it's money well spent. And so that was a little trial balloon that we floated, and it's been successful. And so now we're looking at other areas where we have students out, students who are appropriate to be here, that we can sufficiently, educate. That's something else that we're looking at too, in terms of trying to, bring budget numbers down and keep things in check.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hanfield. I'm looking at the special ed transportation numbers, and this isn't including any sort of tuition, but the non-public school transportation is $240,000.
Yeah. Case in point. Case in point. I mean, So that plus, let's just say, for example, the students in the program I just referenced, it's 500,000, and that doesn't include transportation. So, stuff adds up quick. So yeah, that's a great point you make, right? Special ed out of district transport's almost $250,000. And those prices, are going to continue to escalate because again, it's another case of, sole vendor. You don't get 10 people competing. So you kind of held hostage a little bit to the financial, elements of their proposal.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hanfield. So why don't we vote on the budget recommendation and then just take a look at the CIP. So the school department has requested, or the town manager recommendation and the department request are the same, $27,988,540. That shows a 2.85% increase to fiscal year 2021. Do I hear a motion to recommend this line?
Motion to recommend.
Second?
Great, so all in favor? Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Mike? And myself, yes. Thank you, so the motion passes. So let's look at the CIP next. I see there are items set aside for building rehab for all 4 schools. And, all 5, 5 schools. And then I see that the iPad initiative, $150,000, and that's an ongoing, isn't it, Dr. Hanfield, just to keep
That's
maintaining?
correct.
Yeah, okay. And $150,000 for tech and furniture, or furniture and equipment. All right, so the total CIP, we won't vote on this tonight, but is $917,000. Do the members have any questions on this CIP? No? All right. I don't hear any. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hanfield, for coming and presenting your budget tonight. We appreciate that. And
Pleasure.
and Cecilia Worsbicky, thank you very much. And we'll see you again at town meeting.
I look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Hi, Ed.
All right, members. So the next budget we're looking at is Norfolk Agricultural. And I always lose, okay, here we go. So the department, okay, so the department request is $45,512, but I see the town manager recommendation is $69,000. So, Mr. Casanovas, do you expect an increase in the number of students going to Norfolk?
So we currently, Madam Chair, we currently have 1 enrolled, and as of February 12th, I think there's a memo in, I hope there's a memo in your booklet.
No.
Yeah, we had 1 student who applied for admission that is likely going to be enrolled. So we counted, in the assessment, we accounted for 2 enrollments, including transportation.
Okay. And does this assessment include the transportation cost?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And in the event that student doesn't get enrolled, we will request a modification to this assessment.
Okay, thank you. And are we sharing, are we doing a co-op in the transportation, sharing a bus with some other communities?
That's the way it's structured right now,
Good.
yes.
All right, great. Where is Norfolk at? Is that in, is it in Bridgewater?
I think it's,
Walpole, thank you. Okay. All right, well, we have a town manager recommendation of $69,000 for the Norfolk agricultural line. That's an increase of $23,488, which is the amount for one more new student. Do I hear a motion to recommend this item, this line?
Motion to recommend.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor? Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael? And myself, yes. Thank you thank you. The motion passes. Okay?
Through the chair, while we had the Bay Path superintendent here, we should have made a recommendation they start an agricultural program at Bay Path.
They're getting there. They're doing veterinary services, all right? So they're working their way up,
Farm animals out back. And
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. They have room up there. Yeah, they could have barns and everything. Okay, well, we don't have any minutes to approve this evening, nor do we have any transfers. So we have our schedule for the next 3 weeks, and we still have, next week, we have the Emergency Management Department, Fire Department, Department of Public Works. So those 3 departments, that's going to be, they're going to have a lot of questions for them. And then the next week, the 31st, the Library, Auburn Youth Commission, Veterans, and Solid Waste. And on April 7th, we'll look at the warrant and we'll vote on the CIP. We also have, I believe, maturing debt to look at, and interest, pensions and benefits. And did we approve the reserve fund? I think, if we didn't, we'll look at it then. I'll just double check. And appeals, I think, too. All right, any questions?
And just a comment, thank you, Sharon and Ed, for getting Bay Path and Auburn Public on the same night. That was helpful. I think it's the first time since I've been on that we've been able to hear from both, very similar formulas and things of that nature, talking about Chapter 70 money. It was nice to hear it all in one place, and I think they may have even benefited a little bit hearing each other's presentations a little bit. So, no, that was good. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome. They all fit together. It's one puzzle, so.
Yeah.
I thought we thought it would be beneficial to have them present all on the same night.
Okay. Thank you. Do we hear any other questions? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Aye, aye. Okay.
Aye.
Good night. See you next week.
Aye.
Good night,
Here, everyone.
Sharon. Good night.